into our second plenary session. Thank you. So we're now moving into our second plenary session, which is one that is going to be of exceptional interest, I'm sure, to everybody, because one of the challenges that corporate fundraisers face is some of the legal issues around contracts and the issues about how you can price your brand, what your brand is worth. So it's great that we've got three speakers here today. We've got Max, Edward and Jane, who are each going to talk to you with their different perspectives on this. That issue about pricing is particularly interesting for me because having spent all my working life encouraging companies that working with charities is good value for money and trying to get them to increase the amount that they're giving because they're getting better value and you're adding value, etc. I then had discussions with HMRC about licensing agreements and about what's vatable and what's not, etc. And it's quite sad to know that they value quite often the charity brand quite low compared with what we think it should be. So I always kind of keep quiet about that one because it's you kind of shoot yourself in the foot a bit on it. So it'll be interesting to hear what our group have to say. So we've got, they're each going to have 10 minutes, starting off with Edward, who's going to talk from the legal perspective. And then, again, I'll allow a short amount of time of questions at the end. Sadly, this isn't the opportunity to have 30 seconds of free legal consultancy, much as you'd like it to be. But there will be a chance to chat, I'm sure, to some of them afterwards. And I think their key message is probably that you always do need to get the right advice anyway, so of your own particular situation. So, Edward.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me today. So, what we're going to look at today is risk, and what we're kind of mainly going to consider is the relationship between reputation and the commercial agreements that your hospice is entering into, and essentially some of the steps that you need to be thinking about in order to minimise those. So there's people here who are far more qualified to talk about reputation than me, but in my sort of very simple lawyer's way of thinking about this, reputation boils down to the perception people have of your hospice's brand. And so reputational risk is essentially anything that's going to potentially negatively affect that perception. So if we just very quickly kind of run through what are the kind of things that are really going to affect your hospice's reputation. Well, poor quality of care is going to be pretty high up there, poor use of donations, lack of transparency, regulatory enforcement is potentially a big one, and just general sort of perceptions of mismanagement, dysfunctionality, that kind of thing. And each of these is capable of arising from even actually the most straightforward commercial agreements that you're entering into, and I think that the title of this session refers to print contracts. You know, things as mundane as those can really backfire. So I think the relationship here is pretty simple, and really what it boils down to is any potential commercial risk equals potential reputational risk, and the title of the session is how much is your hospice brand worth and what do you need to do to protect it? Well, really, as far as the situations in which you're entering into commercial contracts, protecting your reputation, protecting your brand comes down to effectively managing the risks within that contract. And if you're not doing that, well, what are you doing? You're putting the care you provide at risk. You're facing financial liability, you face regulatory and media scrutiny, and then you've got this issue of sort of general dysfunctionality, untrustworthiness, and those kind of things. So, what we're going to look at in a really whistle-stop general way, and I know lots of you will have lots of probably quite specific situations that you're thinking about, so apologies that I'm not going to deal with all of those. It's going to be really like kind of broad brush, but we're just going to think a little bit about the risk management process, the importance of clear rights and obligations, which is my favourite topic, managing risks through allocation and control if we get to that bit, but I'm conscious that I'm on a very tight timescale, and then just a few thoughts on written contracts and this idea of sort of pre-contractual agreements. Now, before we get too deep into that, I think it's probably worth just reminding ourselves of actually your hospices are run by your trustees. Your trustees are under lots and lots of duties. Probably the most important one is this one, which is the duty to act in the best interest of the charity and its beneficiaries. And the guidance goes on to say, well, actually, this includes having, a duty to take action to safeguard and protect the charity's assets, goodwill, and reputation. So this is embedded in the law. This isn't something that you can sort of pick and choose about. This is something that you've got to all the time be thinking about. And if your trustees aren't, the people underneath, who are advising them have got to be telling them, actually, is this really the best deal for the charity? And I suppose the point of making it clear, talking about this now, is that actually not assessing commercial risk is not just stupid. This has got significant reputational implications. So, very quickly, thinking about identifying risk. So, whatever it might be, someone comes to you with an idea, you've already got an idea, you've got a deal, someone's given you a contract. What are the kind of things that you've really got to be thinking about, that you've got to nail down in order to make sure that there aren't going to be some kind of unintended consequences of whatever it is that you're entering into? So the first thing is everyone clear what everyone is doing? Are each party's roles, responsibilities agreed? Are specifications of what is being provided clear? Do you have a written contract? Number one, if you haven't, give up, go home, don't do it, it's too risky. Next thing you've got to think about, worst case scenario. If this arrangement goes south, if there's a breach of contract, what's this going to do to your hospice? Is this going to shut you down? Is this going to clear you out? Or is this going to be something more minor? Think a little bit then about what your potential liability for breach is. Generally, I think you're probably going to be getting services in, but of course, there are going to be these arrangements where you're potentially licensing brands, entering into sort of fundraising arrangements, things like that, where actually you're going to be giving quite a lot to the deal too. So the likelihood of breach is higher in those circumstances. So what's going to happen if you don't do what you're supposed to do? How much money ultimately are you going to be on the hook for? Next thing to think about, rights of recovery enforcement. Essentially, what rights do you have? What levers can you pull to make sure that the person that you're dealing with is actually going to do what they said they were going to do? Regulatory compliance is obviously a big one. The two that come across my desk a lot, GDPR is one, obviously. Fundraising regulations is another. So if there are issues there, if there are investigations, prosecutions potentially, where is liability for that falling? And the final thing is, well, it seems obvious, but how long is this arrangement going to last for? How can I get out of it? What if my circumstances change? All of those sort of things. And those are things that you need to be thinking about from a really, really early stage. I can't really sort of stress that enough. So once you've potentially identified where there are pitfalls, it's then a matter of sort of saying, well, actually, how serious is this risk? And essentially, risk assessment, a two-stage process. You'll probably be pretty familiar with this, and that's going to be, one, what is the probability that the risk will arise, and what's the potential impact of that risk? Now, it's easy for me to sit here, stand here and talk about that, because actually making those assessments is difficult and will change from one circumstance to the next, but you can use sort of previous situations that you've been involved in, just sort of general knowledge of industries, practices, those kind of things. But the point of doing this is that you go, actually, those that are high risk, those are the ones that you've really got to worry about. Those are the ones that you've got to argue about, that you've got to really sort out. Those that are low risk, forget about them. Don't waste your time on them. So this is my favourite area, really, and you wouldn't believe the number of people, number of clients that I get who say, we're just about to sign this contract, can you just double check it, just make sure it's all okay? And you look at it and you go, okay, so what are you actually doing? Oh, it's obvious, they're building us a website. Yeah, they're building you a website, but what's that like? To what extent? What does that involve? Are they hosting it? Are they doing only design? Who's owned what? And actually, this is where all the issues, come about. It's because parties enter into these kind of agreements on false assumptions about what it is that the other party is supposed to be doing. And so, making sure these rights and obligations are clear, for these reasons is important. So, performing party, whoever's actually delivering into this, knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and it can also make sure that it's got the necessary resources to make sure that it can go through with that. And then the alternative, the other side of it is that actually you, as the person who's receiving it, has a clear baseline against which you are able to measure performance. And actually, if you haven't got that baseline, you can have the best contract in the world, but if it ever comes to enforcing it, you've got to say, well, they promised they would do X, they have not done it. If you can't demonstrate that, no court in the world is going to, give you any kind of remedy for that. And so the sort of link to this is make sure that whatever is agreed is properly involved in a contract. And I'll give you an actual, this happened only last year actually, came across our desk, and it was a charity client of ours. And I'd like to point out we didn't advise on the tendering process, but they entered into a contract on the back of a tendering process that they had run. And they were supplying drug and alcohol rehabilitation services, so they were being contracted, NHS were contracting them, they were then contracting certain elements of it further down. Now, the subcontracting parties, so the people that the charity were contracting with, had made representations about the number of people they could see per week, how many nurses they would have, how many doctors they would have, all those sort of things. Actually, it became quite apparent quite quickly that they couldn't do any of those things, and so our client had entered into this contract with a supplier who was unable to deliver what they had to deliver. And our client thought, well, what we're going to do, we'll just break the contract, we'll go and find someone else. However, it turned out that they couldn't. And that's because actually the tender documents, all the promises that were put in this tender document didn't make their way into the contract. And so actually the charity had proceeded on the whole basis of assumptions that it had made on information which wasn't binding. Now, this charity faced huge criticism, and actually in the area where they operate continues to face colossal media scrutiny now over everything that it does. So really be warned, if it's not in a contract or somehow demonstrable that that's been what's agreed, then you're going to be in a bit of a problem. So I'm running a little bit tight on time, so I was just going to talk a little bit about allocating and controlling risk. And we'll just very quickly touch on this. And the idea of this is actually where you've identified certain risks, it's actually, is that your risk? Is that something that you should be taking on? Or is that something that you can pass to someone else? So, for example, if you're engaging a fundraiser, you're giving them lots and lots of personal information about your supporters, you should not be on the hook for any fine you end up having to pay for the ICO because they lose your data. And so we would, in those situations, think about having indemnities in place. The alternative is actually going, well, yes, we have an obligation to do something, and if it goes wrong, then you, the other party, are going to suffer some kind of loss, but we want to make sure that our loss is limited, and this is going to be important from your insurers, who I can absolutely guarantee you will not want you entering into agreements on the basis of any kind of unlimited liability, because they simply just won't insure you. So, we'll just skip through those bits for now. So just to sort of finish off, I've talked about written contracts, and the assumption here is actually that you should always be entering into written contracts, and that's, unless it's of such tiny risk, you just think, this is only £10 or whatever it might be, fine. But, have a written contract. Absent a written contract, you've still got a legally binding agreement. It's just incredibly difficult to work out what is in it, and therefore you're essentially opening yourself up to an argument, wasted costs, potentially going to court, public scrutiny, around that. So make sure it's in writing. And then this idea of pre-contractual arrangements. Now, I suspect lots and lots of people here will have at some point entered into either memorandums of understanding or non-disclosure agreements. They're a classic one. And they're often deemed to be pre-contractual. Sign these, we can then get the main agreement signed thereafter. They're sort of facilitating freedom, movement of confidential information, things like that. But I'll give you an example. A charity client of mine entered into negotiations in respect to a fundraising agreement. Sort of event fundraising. It was one of these sort of Tough Mudder events. They thought they'd got someone who was going to do the whole event, start to finish. Actually, it turns out the supplier wasn't able to do that. They were just offering some sort of consultancy services. So on that basis, the charity said, well, actually, we don't really want you to pay to do this. We want you to pay to do the whole thing. So they tried to break off negotiations. unbeknownst to the charity, well, everyone in the charity apart from one person, the particular person involved, had actually signed a memorandum of understanding. Now, generally, these are not binding, and she had just gone, oh, it's a memorandum of understanding, sign it, off she goes. It actually contained these clauses. It said, this agreement shall stand in place until all parties have determined and signed a contract for event design and event management services to the satisfaction of all parties, and this agreement shall be deemed to have commenced on the 23rd of November and continue for as long as the client owns and operates the event unless terminated by either party. So, what have we got? We've got a binding contract, but so we've got an obligation from the charity to pay for the service provider to deliver, although it wasn't clear really what they were supposed to be delivering, and no means of actually getting out of this. And the charity actually in the end parted with 7 figures to get rid of this. So next time you see an MOU, don't just sign it. Come and talk to someone lovely like me. So just a few practical tips very, very quickly. Really what you've got to be here is proactive, and that's the sort of one at the bottom here. I don't know if you can see that, but really you've got to be thinking about what your risks are before you start entering into these kind of agreements and arrangements, and just having a clear sort of view as to what the landscape looks like and potentially what you're going to be in for. And so just a couple of things here. If you're contracting in respect of certain things really regularly, have your own standard forms, have a risk policy. Lots of you have got one of these, but make sure everyone knows what it is, keep it up to date. You know, risks change, and so the policy should as well. Make sure everyone knows what's in it. Due diligence, not going to talk too much about that because someone else is going to talk about due diligence in a minute. And then just this final point, just be proactive, don't be reactive, because once you've discovered the problem, you know, generally it's too late. Try and head it off. So I think that's me. I'm going to hand over, and I think we've got questions later on. So thank you ever so much.
Brilliant, thank you, Edward. So now that's the legal perspective. So Max is going to look at the from a kind of branding consultancy perspective, and particularly having just done the branding for Trinity Hospice. So I'll hand over to Max.
Hello, I'm Max. I work with lots of passionate people, and we create brands for social change. We create them across a very broad range of sectors, and actually, the organisations we find affect the best social change aren't the 200 million plus charities. It's actually smaller charities. It's often around the 75, 25, 75, 100, 150 million charities who are still driven by their mission and purpose. Now, I'm going to approach this from a brand perspective. I'm going to talk some general principles. Then I'm going to look at one, possibly 2 examples, one for Royal Trinity. Have we got anybody here from Royal Trinity today? Oh no, they're fabulous. Love Dallas Pounds, their chief executive. God, maybe they knew I was speaking. And then one for Samaritans, whose corporate engagement has gone from being really difficult to actually really powerful at the moment. So, I wish there was an equation to help you value how much you can get. There isn't. There's lots of rubbish talked about equations. There's lots of brand valuation. I used to do it 20 years ago in the corporate world. A lot of that's smoke and mirrors. But they've got a lot of stuff we don't have, like tangible sales. Very powerful tracking data. There's no equation. It often comes down to this. I don't have to tell you this. You're experts in this. It's how much can we get? How little are they going to pay? And you're trying to narrow, somebody nodding your head, it's trying to narrow that gap. Now, of course I'm going to say this. For me, brand is a way of increasing the how little they're going to give you and increasing how much you're going to get from them. So, how does it do that? Can everyone see that chart? I am large, I do get in the way. Sorry, it's shining through our glove puppets here. So, brand, now this is from a corporate or a commercial perspective. You can do it for charities as well. Brand you can split into 2. Preference at the top, why choose me? And trust, why believe me? So just think of any brand you've recently bought. It had something in there you wanted, but if you didn't trust the organisation, you wouldn't go for it. If the brand didn't have something you wanted, it's a load of rubbish, you wouldn't go for it. Now, how does brand fit in? At the bottom, can you see altruism? This is the boat along which everything will either go up like an amplifier or go down. If an organisation you're talking to has a personal connection, it could have been a recent bereavement, it could have been a very good experience with you, then their whole propensity to support you shoots up. If they haven't, then it's kind of, Now, how can you get more? If we take a look at the trust level, there are three things that people will pay for, and they're in order of how much you can get out of them. At the lowest is, we're expected to do something. Should we do the school this year? Should we do the hospice is nice. We'll do the hospice. Or we do the hospice every year. That's expected. You might get a little more each year, but it's pretty low bucks. The next one is enhance. If your brand, purpose, reputation, value will enhance their brand or how they feel about themselves, often to their employers, they're in a battle of talent. Sometimes to their customers, we'll come on to that in a moment. Then you get more cash for that. Now, an area where you'll get the most cash is they've got a broken brand and a bad reputation. They want to brand jack yours. Now, people here will go, oh, don't do it. I say, look at the risk, look at the reputation, and in the words of Lawrence Fishburne, the money don't know where it comes from. But you have to be very sensitive with that, because it could be in an area that's nothing to do with you. It could be a turned around organisations. They will play hand over fist, particularly as a lot of you are local and embedded in the local communities. Organisations love that. National organisations love that as well. Going up to the much bigger moolah, at the top you've got preference. Preference is, how can what you do help me shift product to my customers? That's the high cash. At the bottom of it, you've got visibility. So by partnering with you, it gives us greater visibility. You haven't got lots of marketing channels, so that's a bit hard. So you're reliant on their channels. Having said that, piggybacking on a corporate sponsor's channels, as you all know, is a great way to lift the overall brand awareness. The next one, I think, is the new area. We've all heard everyone's going over to purpose. The Fortune 500 companies in New York in October changed their articles and said we are no longer about maximizing shareholder profit, brackets screwing everybody to make as much money for the billionaires. We are now going to get involved with all our stakeholders. That's greenwashing. A company called BlackRock, it controls 7.5 trillion in funds. That makes it the 19th biggest country in the world. The chairman there has gone through a midlife crisis and said, we're not going to invest in anyone unless they're dealing with social purpose. Why? Because we think governments are failing their people. So purpose is big. If you can link into purpose for an organisation, that's where you'll really begin to see some good negotiation points. Top of it is product. Can you help them shift product? And I say this is a general brand valuation slide. You often aren't going to be able to do that. So it's in purpose that I think you've got real power. And that's where brand can help. Now, I'm going to put this up here. The days of the old charity check being handed over for anything are kind of over. 70% of companies are now aligning their corporate giving to their core purposes. Lloyd's TSB now will only begin to give to other organisations that are about helping the UK thrive. That's a fairly loose description, but you can argue hospices are on the wrong side of that one. It's a pretty hard sell. However, and this is the really lovely thing, why are they doing this? Well, because there are actually some good people in organisations who really want to make the world a better place. They're like us, just get paid more. A lot more, and they have recent office, and they have nice offices and comfortable chairs, and biscuits in meetings. Don't. So I'm bitter and warped. Did I take the wrong turning 20 years ago? 83% of people, consumers, us, say we would sooner buy from a company that's got a good social product and purpose. When you drill down into that data, it's very recent. Actually, they will pay more. A bit more, not a huge amount more. We will pay more for social purpose. That is why organisations want to get into purpose. And you've got a tough sell. Selling death. Or the time before death, I know. And you've got another problem, which is, where does the NHS stop, but I'm being taxed for this, and your work start? Saying, well, actually, we provide all the extra bits. It's a tough sell. Believe me, I understand. You have my respect. Now, I'm going to talk to you about Royal Trinity Hospice, based down in South London, London-wide. Love them a lot. Fabulous team there. They had such really ambitious and innovative plans. And one of the issues is now our work goes beyond the hospice into people's homes and cares. So they had some really ambitious plans. However, they'd couched them in kind of really language, kind of corporate language. It didn't capture the hearts. And to quote Ant, their new corporate fundraiser, who's now head of fundraising, their visual brand just cut them off at their knees. Dallas Pounds just said, it looks crap. I don't know why we've waited so long to do this, but we just can't live with it anymore. Why? It looks old, it looks dated, it reinforces all the out-of-date perceptions people were thinking. But they were frightened of changing in case they lost any awareness. And we understand that. So, they've also got some interesting competitors. Everyone is converging on death. You've got Sue Ryder doing a land grab. You've got people like Macmillan and Marie Curie who can compete with us in terms of support and care, and have got bigger brands and are better known. And you've also now got the hospital brands as well, beginning to fundraise as well. Now, we could say, actually, people say they like to give to small local charities. They say that, so why are there so many big charities who get so much cash? It's this kind of inherent contradiction. Because they're visible, they know them, they see them. So, we looked at lots of different, definitions. Brand, the message, branding, the logo, the look and feel that goes everywhere. We looked at lots of different territories they could occupy. Are they about challenging the death taboo, changing the way we think about it? Are they about the practical champion, looking at innovations and improvements on the way things have done? And will that lead to a better end for everyone as they operationalise and share that? There's a bit of it. Is it about the guide? Is it about protecting you from suffering? And the truth is, it's a bit about all of that. So, what's the final brand we wound up looking at? We focused on the fact that every moment matters. This was the thing we were told by the people they were supporting and caring for and their teams, that it was about making every moment matter in that person's life, providing the support and care, wrapping our services as much around it as we could. When I first walked in there was such a positive feeling about the place. I did have to go, wow, I'm humbled that I was so ignorant. It's about joy. There is joy. There can be joy. There can be laughter. And they work to bring that out. So it's not about death, doom, angel of death. But also it's about helping people tackle with the anxiety and the fear. And their families tackle the anxiety and fear. And actually often interfere with their own healthcare plans. It's helping to tackle that, to help people be unafraid. It's using the word death. We weren't allowed to use any other word but death when we were talking about it. Because they wanted to say, look, it's okay, we need to own this word to move forward. Might use a lot of words before and after it, but. And also it's about honesty. It's not glossing over it, those core things. And it's about how do you live your best to the last. That's what we're about doing, helping people live their best to the last. All quite motivating, all quite powerful statements. Some of them were there before. A lot of them were overshadowed by people's perceptions or by all the other information they had. This is the technical brand positioning. Can you all see that? I'm in the way, clearly. Just have a quick read. At the top, we've got what do we do together with you to the end of life, quite obvious. How are we different? Actually, it's about the personalised care, and that's why we need your support above and beyond the NHS. And the whole brand essence is about living every moment to the last. I personally love the ethos. We believe every moment matters. Our specialist team provides the best quality palliative care, etc., etc. I'll stand sideways because if you're photographing it, you're just going to get me in there and I'm large. So that is the brand message. When it came to the actual visual branding, this is no disrespect, they didn't want to go down the house route, the kind of bird route, the kind of areas in the sector. Also, they wanted something that was distinctive that could push back in a very noisy world of national charity brands as well, although they're not. Now, the identity here, well, what do you see in it? Our start point is one thing, but it was what people saw in it. What they saw in it was the focus in the centre on the individual, all the different pathways and support. Some people saw it as a flower, which was positive. Some people saw it as a snowflake, as uniqueness and individual. Some people just saw it as a very distinctive, beautiful thing and mark. Actually, it was based on those multiple care pathways and the communities and spreading out. Now, a big thing here on protecting your brand, 3 minutes. Always register your logo. Check you've got a registered logo. That's one of the best ways of protecting it. So, but also, how does the logo go across everything in a really powerful and distinctive way? How do you create, not consistency, consistency is the death of brand. It's coherence. How do we create the brand messages that wrap around every opportunity and the visual branding that allows you to take it and use it in whichever way you want? So it's trying to make it flow across everything, across all the material. Of course, it's easy to do it in, if you like, community fundraising and events. Now, I'm going to quote Anthony, who's the new fundraising director there. He came in at corporate and was promoted. He said, the old brand, as I said, cut us off at the knees. The new one is professional and fresh. The messages in the brand is a great start point. It's desirable and distinctive. It helps me compete with national brands. I said, it shows that we know what we do and we love what we know. So, quite nice in the conversation. Please, there's no one from Royal Trinity to stand up and say that's a load of crap. Very quickly, in the last 2 minutes, some work which has gone down really well in the corporate sector for Samaritans. Might not know the stats. 1 in 5 of us have serious suicidal thoughts. Unfortunately, every 90 minutes, someone acts on them. This is a national tragedy. It's a national tragedy. Samaritans, fantastic organisation, you all think of it as picking up the phone. What they wanted to do was produce lots of services to help us look out for our friends and become a nation of great listeners, to help us build individual resilience, particularly in the young. And they wanted to reach out and break their age limit of 65 plus in terms of giving and volunteering, go into the new digital arena, and actually reach out to Gen Z, millennials, and all the other cliches marketing people like. On that brand, it wasn't working. It was cold, remote, and distance. The new brand, very contentiously, talked about bringing hope to life through the power of human connection. That's what they focused on as their core platform. We didn't really change the logo much. We thickened up the type so it worked digitally, but actually it was a very corporate identity. So it had a logo and some colours and a secondary typeface. What we did was create a lot of kits of brand parts so they could wrap it round coherently, not consistently, around lots of different opportunities, looking at the different human language, looking at different opportunities, that power of human connection. Anybody who knows the network of rail campaigns, fabulous, giving the frontline staff will just go up, and if they see somebody looking distressed, because a lot of people commit suicide on the railways, take their lives on railways, we'll just say, how you doing? Do you want a cup of tea? Just that power of human connection, so really great elements. Making it digital, having all those brand assets to spread across, particularly when it comes to physical environments, concerts, what have you, including the bus. I love the bus. Every agency likes a bus. They always want a bus. Down to this. They had real problems getting into some corporate arenas. They started packaging up their products to make corporates who were really worried about mental being and wealth and mental health to begin to create their own great nation of listeners. They began to spread out to other people who had that power. And the first part was the cause. Is this a problem for you? Do you want to help solve it internally, externally? And then started packaging up. You can see some of the examples there. Samaritans, that's PwC. Our partnership with Samaritans will help them train 500 volunteers who could answer an additional 105, actually a little more, calls. And that's X number of lives changed. So you can see how they went in there with packages and negotiated with them to do those things specifically. How do you make your brand more valuable and protectable? Simple rule of branding. Make it distinctive so it stands out from the pack. Make it relevant so it appeals to both your audiences and understand how you appeal to the corporate audiences and their purpose. Most important thing is capture the imagination, the hearts and minds with it. Thank you very much.
So that's really fascinating to have the legal side and then that brand consultancy side, which some really interesting examples there. So we're now going over more to the consultancy side, and Jane has, some of you may have seen her on her stand as well, is going to talk to us about these issues from that consultancy perspective.
Thank you.
And so what we're going to do is we should still have about 10 minutes at the end for some questions.
Hello, lovely to be here, and I'm very honoured to be asked to speak today. I am going to talk to you about due diligence, so please have your coffee at the ready. Because it's not one of the most uplifting discussion points, but it's incredibly important, particularly now where cause-related marketing, where corporate partnerships are really on the rise and are such an important part of your fundraising. Now, many of you will know me from Majestic Publications, our family business. We are a commercial participator. That comes under the heading of corporate partnerships. And we've been doing that for 20 years. But about 18 months ago, I started up my own consultancy to work with charities of all sizes, to talk to them about their due diligence frameworks, to talk to them about commercial participation, to talk to them about ethical policies, and the importance of having that embedded within your processes and structures within your hospice and charities. Now, due diligence, two words that are most likely to elicit a sigh and a roll of the eyes. Oh, God. It's probably up there with risk assessment and legitimate interest in terms of fun. But it is absolutely crucial that you are carrying out your due diligence when you are going to form partnerships with companies that are out there. You never want to turn away money. That's not what charity is about. But sometimes to do that and to have the reasoning behind it is far more important than going ahead with a relationship that might not be the best fit for your charity. So important is it that it's actually in the code. It's right there, right in the new code, under the standards working with us, there's section 7. It has 2 sections, not just due diligence, but also monitoring, because due diligence is not a stationary thing. It should be throughout the whole course of that relationship, something that you are constantly looking at and making sure that things are going the way that they can and should. Now, right up there, you've got in the Code of Fundraising Practice that you should all be open, honest and transparent. That is what is demanded of you by the fundraising regulator. You should be forming relationships with organisations that are also open, honest and transparent. Why would you not? Why would you want to go and form a relationship with an organisation that's perhaps a little furtive? Somebody a little seedy? You're not going to. The quality of your corporate relationships will bring about further corporate relationships, and good quality ones will bring more to you. So it's so important that you have in place a framework that can help you make the right decisions about who you want to go into partnership with. Now, I do believe that the British Secret Service has missed a trick in terms of their recruitment. I think if you want to know anything about anybody, you ask a fundraiser. If a celebrity moves into your catchment area, you are on them. You are more tenacious than Colleen Rooney. You are right in there. You will find them. So let's put those skills to test in terms of looking into the companies that you want to, that either come to you or that you approach about partnerships. There's some of the areas that you might want to look at. By no means should it be limited to that. But you want to look at their ethics. You want to know why they want to be involved with you. You want to know about how good they are in terms of their policies, vulnerable people, complaints. You want to know about the company structure. You want to know about the reputation. You want to know not just in a business reputation, but also within the third sector. Is this something that they've done before? Now, size doesn't matter. We often hear that phrase, different contexts admittedly, but you should be carrying out due diligence on each relationship that you are looking to go into, each partnership. You're not going to conduct the same amount of due diligence on a company that's going to give you £200, £300 a year. You're really not. You are going to go into great detail if a company is going to give you £150,000, if it's going to be a partnership that's going to go on for some years. This is something that you need to look at. So you need to make sure that it's proportionate. You need to make sure that it's common sense. But also, is it reasonable? Does it correctly reflect how risk adverse your hospice is? Every charity has different tolerance to risk. Some have no problem at all in engaging and going with betting companies, Betfred, something like that. Others, absolutely no go. At the end of that due diligence process, you want to know, is it good for you? Are you going to be coming out of this in a positive way? You want to know why they want to get involved. You want to make sure that the balance of benefit lands with you. That company wants to be linked with you because they want to enhance their reputation. Is that going to enhance yours? These are very, very simple questions. The pressure is on us at the moment. Here comes money, we need to take it because we've got to hit the fundraising target. Take a breath. Just take a moment and step back. Is the time needed to actually work that relationship going to cost you far more in hidden costs than you're ever going to receive? Just have a look at all of the different aspects. But if you get to know a company really well, how they work, what makes them tick, you can actually identify other areas that perhaps you can help them with or that can bring funding into you. So due diligence should not be a dirty term. It actually can be something really, really positive. Now, you have responsibilities to more than just your beneficiaries. You have responsibility to your supporters, your corporate supporters. You have responsibility to your staff. You have a responsibility to your reputation. Equally, all of that has a responsibility to you. Due diligence works both ways. How open are you to scrutiny? What do you have in place within your hospice that defines your values? Do you have an ethical policy? How many here have ethical policies? So not the majority. Your ethical policy is what you are telling people you stand for. From there, you can define your due diligence. How can you go into due diligence if you're not really sure what your organisation as a whole stands for? That also needs to have been built in through all levels of staffing. Have you got your volunteers involved with that? Have you got your chief exec involved with that? What about your service users? Everybody should have an input into how that ethical policy and the due diligence as a result of that will work. Do you tell people about it when they come in on their induction process? So right from the get-go, they know what you stand for and how they should be behaving. Because it's not just about, this is what we want from people in order to get money. This is about setting out your stall. These are the people that we are. This is our organisation as a whole. And you should have a common purpose. It's a fluid thing. It cannot just be set in stone. We had 4 or 5 years ago the situation with Olive Cook, which brought about us looking at vulnerable people in the complaints process, brought about the fundraising regulator. Now the environment is also a massive issue too, as is modern slavery. Have you revisited and revised your policies to ensure that that is reflected? Trends change. Are you keeping up to date with that? Royal Shakespeare Company listened to young people who came and took advantage of the BP subsidised ticket scheme. But turned around, the young people were saying, we don't want you linked with an organisation that is damaging the environment. As a consequence, the Royal Shakespeare Company listened and took action and severed that link. Now, there's a trust barometer that's been coming out over the last 20 years. And it is an international thing, but this is the Edelman also have a UK report that's part of it. This was carried out between October and November last year. The results were published in January. It's based on the public's rating, understanding, trust of 4 main institutions: business, government, media, and charities. Out of 28 markets, we ranked 27th in terms of how trusted the population felt, how the population felt about trusting those 4 main institutions. 27th. France came higher. France, who are currently rioting, the yellow vest and everything else, they have more trust in their institutions than we do. And what was interesting was that charities went up by a percentage point between 2019 and 2020, but after the election it dropped to 42%. So 42% of people sat there and said, yes, I trust charities. It's only 42%. That's frightening. So that there needs to be a lot done for you to go out there and say, we are a trustworthy charity. You can place your faith in us. And by doing your due diligence and looking at the companies that you are linking with, that can only enhance that. If you have a look at some of the scandals that have hit Oxfam with the sex scandal of a couple of years ago, what Goldring said, I am sorry, we are sorry for the damage Oxfam has done both to the people of Haiti, but also to wider efforts for aid and development by possibly undermining public support. That is really key. He recognised that the actions of those employees, those aid workers of Oxfam, impacted not just on Oxfam, but on charities as a whole. You may be working within your community, but community can be a hell of a big thing. If you think about where your fundraising comes from sometimes, you can be getting money in from all over the world because of a link, a family link perhaps. And that's very, very key. Prince Andrew, how quickly did those companies and charities run away from Pitch the Palace? Really sad because it's a fantastic organisation. He's now been removed. I do find it very odd, though, that he didn't get much of a slating, but Meghan, who liked avocados, apparently is bringing about the end of the world. But Pitch the Palace was, again, a really, really key example of how quickly things can change with a headline. Now we come to RNLI. RNLI are a fantastic organisation. But they had a situation back in 2018 where they had to sack 2 of their crew members at Whitby because they had put together a pornographic mug of a volunteer. So they had a pornographic image that apparently was so bad couldn't be replicated within a newspaper, not even The Sun, and had put the face of a volunteer on that body. The volunteer didn't know. The crew were outraged that 2 of their members were sacked. What RNLI forgot to do was check who had charge of the Twitter account. And so there were tweets coming out saying, "Thank you for destroying our crew," from the Whitby RNLI team. Now that's a big thing. Once it's out on Twitter, there's no going back. Then, joy of joy, the Daily Mail gets involved back in September of last year, talking about how they give foreign aid, how the RNLI support foreign communities. Amazing work, but not really what the Daily Mail likes to say. Now, actually, that last headline didn't have the effect that the Daily Mail wanted, because what happened was RNLI did lose supporters, but then there was a surge of support of new people going, actually, do you know what? That's a fantastic thing to do. And it turned. And what is lovely is that now they did turn the tide, if you pardon the pun. And there's the article there in November of last year. Because what they did, RNLI, because they have such a strong ethical policy, they have such a strong value system, is that they turned around and went, "We're not apologising. We're not standing down from this. This is what we believe." Now that was enormous. Because normally as a charity, if something goes wrong, the first instinct is, we're going to conduct a big investigation. We're very, very sorry for what's happened. Obviously we're in the wrong. They turned around and said, no, we were absolutely right. We stand by our values. And if you read their ethical policy, they have a line in it that says, things we will not change. And they're their values that they've listed. That's really strong. Have you got that? Shouldn't you have it? Have a look at that. So that's the way that it can turn around. So, this is my last slide. So, you need to remember, the due diligence, it works both ways. It goes both ways. You're as much up for scrutiny as they are. Be prepared to ask the difficult questions. Be prepared to answer the difficult questions. Because if your charity is worth something, fight for it. Show them how amazing you are. Be proud of it. Make sure that you know how risk-averse your hospice is. That's something that's really important for you all to understand, because that will define who you get into bed with. But if you can go out there and you can convey that pride, it's only going to lead to positives. I hope that's been of use. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. So hopefully you've now got a really rounded perspective on the different issues to do with the valuing your brand and some of the legal aspects of it, and that last thing about due diligence. So we have got time for some questions. So while we're just getting the things out, I've just got one perhaps for you, Jane, first about due diligence, which obviously is so important. Do you have any advice for people here who are saying, yes, that's great, but how much does it cost to do? Because it's not something that a corporate fundraiser can necessarily integrate, although they have to do some of it themselves. That there are costs involved, and that's often a barrier. So have you got any advice for the group about that?
I think the likelihood, is this on? Am I on? Thank you. I think the likelihood is that you're already doing due diligence that you're just not aware that you're doing. You're asking questions about a company structure. You're doing a social media search on them. So there are already things that you're doing. Put a framework in place and list all the areas that you want to be covered, and that should become part of the natural investigation process that you carry out. The thing that I'd flip is the cost of the charity of getting it wrong is going to be far greater than spending half a day on a really big due diligence exercise, making sure that you get it right. So I think you've got to invest that time, because it can lead to dividends and help fundamentally going forward in the future, that you're not going to be tripped up and you're not going to have a relationship that perhaps will cost you more.
Have you got any examples of charities that have actually got a budget line for due diligence?
No. I think it's one of those areas that is actually it is a cost, but nobody ever puts it in there as a cost. And actually they should be. Yeah.
And just a quick question for Edward. One of the things that I get asked so often about the corporate participator contracts in particular is, I've got my local fish and chip shop that's donating us XP for every fish and chips sold on a Friday night. They're not going to want to sign a legal contract, but legally they're required to have one. Can you do a commercial participator light type agreement? So what would your answer be to that?
It's a difficult one. I think there isn't in existence, as far as I'm aware, a sort of template document, a sort of one-size-fits-all, and that very much reflects just sort of all kind of legal agreements, really, in that there's always going to be subtleties in terms of what the actual deal involves. Now, my response to those kind of issues coming up is always going to be, well, actually, the commercial participator, the company here, is getting some kind of benefit from doing this. And so if they, you know, if they want to go to the dance, they've got to get dressed up, you know, I think is the way of putting it. You know, they've got to be willing to enter into these agreements. And if they're not, then you've got to say, well, actually, do we want to, is the amount of money you're giving us worth the risk of us actually being in breach of regulation? My view would be probably not. But I think you've got to be completely candid with anyone straight up and just say, look, actually, we are going to require some sort of written agreement. It's got to be on a formal footing, and that's the only way that we can go forward and do business.
And I think that's a really good example of where the class thing, we're all in it together, and we all have to follow best practice, not just for legal reasons. And if some people say, oh, well, we won't worry about it, we'll just let them get with it because we know we want the money, then that ruins it for other people who go along and do it properly and say, actually, no, you do need an agreement. They say, well, that charity didn't. So we all have to follow best practice because we're all in the same boat. Just a quick question for you, similarly. With branding, we know that that can cost significant amounts of money. What's your view about branding light? So I've seen organisations who said, we haven't got a big budget, we'll tweak the colour, we'll get a graphic designer just to do a bit of this, that and the other, and that'll be our rebrand.
I'll use that one. I think that the first thing is brand is an investment, not a cost. It's easy to say. The second thing is look at your brand and ask yourself, are we going to be successful because of our brand or in spite of our brand? And if it's in spite of your brand, you've got a much better argument to move it forward. And you can begin to put tangible opportunities and lost opportunities. The final thing is brand light. Sometimes people look at the brand, so the messaging. That's often the easiest thing to begin to fix and move. And that's really the heart and root of it all. Then when you come to the logo and the colours, the branding, often the branding gets the bad rep for other stuff that isn't working. And I'd say, don't tweak, make significant move. There's no point changing a little bit of typeface here and there. You can do things to zhuzh your core brand, like the logo up. Look at your photography. Invest in your photography. Invest in the way you produce materials. But unfortunately, we live in a highly competitive world for attention, and you're not competing with other hospices or other charities for share of professionalism. You're competing with the wider world. So it is unfortunately one of those things where if you do it, I'd say do it wholeheartedly. It doesn't have to cost a lot. It doesn't have to cost a lot. And I think use the Thomas Edison quote, we have no money, therefore we must think. See how far you can push it yourselves. Our process is co-creative, so we draw on your guys' wisdom. We just facilitate that because we get to do it 10 times a year, so we get quite good at it. And also you can get an awful lot of freebies out of people like us.
Brilliant. Okay, questions? Who would like to ask a question over there?
Hello, thanks very much. I enjoyed that a lot. My question probably to all of you is linked onto what you've just said is, and hopefully this will resonate for other people in the room, is about attaching value to using partnerships or other partners using charity logo. So quite a contentious issue, I think, sometimes for higher-ups or SLT or different directors. Where do you stand on kind of saying no or using the logo when often, let's be honest, it's freely available for partners if they want to use it, or only working with people up to a certain value or above a certain value?
Okay.
Thanks. I'm going to, in terms of the due diligence side and that side, but I'll let the guys answer their part of it. I think if you've got a relationship with somebody, nothing that they should be doing should be secretive. If you're going to, if they're going to use your logo, define where they can use it, how they can use it, how long they can use it for. and ensure that that is happening. So if the partnership is for a year, check in 18 months that your logo isn't still floating around. But if they're a good company, then they should want to stick to that. It shouldn't really be an issue. But I would suggest that you define how and where you want it and make sure.
But then how do you define or work out how much you actually charge? What?
Well, I'm going to let these guys answer that because I'm just dealing with the due diligence side of it. Enjoy.
I think I would echo those comments, and I would say you've got to make sure that any agreement that you've got has got these license terms really, really clearly set out. Now, in terms of value, I'm going to pass the buck. As a lawyer, it's not really my job to sort of say that, and ultimately it's going to vary wildly according to circumstances and also, risk to an extent. Do you think, is this person, they might be fine, but do you think there's a bit of a risk it could go a bit wrong? Do you need to be reimbursed or remunerated in effect of that risk? So I don't think there's a hard and fast answer, and I think you've probably got to review it on a case-by-case basis. I don't know if Max has perhaps got more concrete ideas.
As it comes down to the value, what is the value of it? I think it's very simple. Talk to them about what they want to achieve in their business plans and goals. If it's just they want to do it out of good of the cause, fabulous. With Samaritans, you saw at the end, it was about helping staff feel good about the organisation and also about solving some real problems they have at PwC by getting people involved and becoming great listeners. So think laterally, think how else they can get involved, but also think how you can add value to their business, and whether that's the business of their business, making money, if it's the reputation of their business which drives that, or is it just the heart and soul of their business, which is increasingly important. As far as people hanging onto your logos, they're your logos. They use it a year beyond, take it to court, see how much more cash you want to get. Hire the most vicious Rottweilers you can. They are ripping you off. They're ripping off the people who need your help. Go vicious.
Just a couple of added perspectives to that. Sometimes they don't think that they are ripping you off. They think they're doing you a favour by hanging on and using the logo because they think they're giving you a profile. There have been some examples of charities that have had a floor and below which they won't go, and they've ended up having a really bad reputation with companies who just think they're being really arrogant. They had a strategy behind it, but you do need to be careful about it. And I think the other thing is separating out, valuing the overall partnership from valuing the licensing value of the logo, because they are two completely different things. Because the value of a partnership is built up on what you're offering them and how much it's worth to them. And that's one exercise. The actual logo branding is a slightly separate thing. And so I kind of separate the two out. Right. Another question?
Can I just add to that? I mean, having someone who's sat both on charity side and CSR side, just to add on to that, I think the point that Max makes is absolutely spot on. But the only thing I would say is that don't rush to kind of find that value. Get all the cards out on the table, have that longer conversation with whoever the partner is, and then ultimately talk about that internally and then make the decision. Because I remember when we were internally at ITV, we had a lot of organisations that did come to us and say, if we're not getting this, we don't want to play. And to start with, from our point of view, we didn't really look at them as partners. Whereas we had others who wanted to talk to us for a long period of time, often the smaller organisations, and then we'd come to some agreement because we'd understand it from their point of view.
I think
Just to be clear, I don't disagree. I'm saying one higher up are asking these such questions, not me, and I'm sure possibly other people in the room.
I think the other thing to add into this is the issue of minimum guarantees, because it's best practice to negotiate a minimum guarantee, and that's the way of flushing out the people who are just, in effect, messing you around because they want lots of benefits and don't want to give you much. And that's something that everyone should be doing anyway for that purpose.
A minimum guarantee is the key point on that one as well. I think it is, like you say, flushing out those, because we've had a lovely company who's really small but wants to do their thing, and they did give us a minimum guarantee, and that's worked out, and it's generated. We actually thought it wouldn't generate much, but it's given us £1,000 a month ongoing, which for a small company, I think that's really great, and I think they're doing it for the right reasons, and they're also giving us freebies and stuff, and it's definitely built it up. But that was from somebody being brave enough to say, what is your minimum guarantee, what will you give us? And they did name a price, and we were actually happy with that. But it is a really difficult boundary. to build on.
May I just add, a lot of people you're dealing with are business people. They get this. And if you're dealing with big organisations, with people who are in CSR, often these people have committed almost career suicide because you don't go many other places in an organisation, so they get this. And as for the higher-ups, fire it back to them. Say, what would they expect? What would they do? They're meant to be leading you. You can duck behind that for a couple of weeks.
I've got an example of hosting a round table of some CSR people from some major national companies, and I can still remember one. It was a financial institution, but I won't tell you which one it was, who said, we had a charity in the other day that we were talking about doing some work with them, when we suggested an amount of money that we'd be exchanging, and they said yes. I said, we expected them to negotiate. And I think that's that is something that I think a lot of fundraisers don't realise, that companies are used to doing things in a certain way and actually think about charities in the same way. And so don't be frightened about negotiating, because it will be expected. Now, no chair likes to stand between the audience and their lunch. So we are going to break now until 10 to 2. That's right, I think, yes, 10 to 2. So lunch is out there, 2 stations. Don't forget, don't pinch someone else's food if there's special diets. But I'm sure it's all lovely anyway. Do use the chance to have lots of conversations with each other. Look forward to seeing you in an hour's time.